What's up, guys? It's GM Max here, and in this game we're going to see the opening that club players loathe and grandmasters love. But the good news is that even though I am a chess grandmaster, I've decided to come on your side for this video. After bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez, the opening of champions. Well, what about the move knight to f6? Now, the Berlin is admittedly quite a good opening. I even recommended it recently in the club played expert repertoire that I recently constructed. But I want to show you a really dangerous attacking system that I know if I was playing as black would really scare me a lot. And you might think, okay, it's going to be funny. It's the move d3. You might think, okay, go on, stop pulling my leg, Max. Like, you're going to say that d3 is the key to hacking the opponent's king in the Berlin. Well, actually, the answer is yes. Now, okay, to be fair, black can play the move d6 and try and make it a boring positional game. But it's actually a blind that's quite good for white. You know, you can castle. You put the pawn on c3 and you just play your normal Spanish moves like knight d2, rook e1. Like, you'd almost play like you'd sort of play it on autopilot. Like, okay, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to open them up again when I get in my d4 break and get a nice small pull. Okay, I'm joking a little bit, but you get the idea that these positions are quite easy to play. And basically it's an improved version of certain lines of the Ruy Lopez in it. You know, they commit to bishop e7 and all this stuff. For those who do want something aggressive, you know, d4 is the sharper way to play if you want to just attack him from the get-go. But anyway, the move bishop c5 was actually the one that was played in our model game here between Wei Yi playing against David Navara in the Title Still 2016. And it's not the modern Wei Yi who's happy to play solidly and make draws of the top GMs, but it's the young Wei Yi who love to hack the opponent's king and play brilliancies against Bruzon and in this case against Navara. So now the move I consider best for white is the move that Wei Yi played with bishop takes c6. And the idea of this delayed exchange variation is that this of course is a somewhat inflexible structure. And what we notice after the move knight bd2 here, you know, putting the knight to the standard Spanish square, is that the knight on f6 is not really ideally placed because you'd want to have the pawn on f6 in a lot of positions in order to make sure that pawn is well defended. And also the bishop on c5, even though it's an active diagonal, it doesn't really do that much and would be better placed defending that pawn on d6, for example. Actually, these comments kind of explain to us why black played the move he did in the game of going castles. I'll point out the move bishop e6 is also a decent try, but I do think that after castles, knight to d7, and knight b3 that white is the one fighting for an advantage. A key point is that if the bishop were to retreat, then we can go knight g5. And in this way, we're going to eliminate black's bishop pair advantage, which is sort of the main thing that black has going for him in this position. And well, after takes to make sure to open up the a file for our rook without needing to move the rook. And by playing for something like knight f3 and preparing the f4 break in the middle game, well, that's going to allow us to pressure the center and have a very small pull, in my humble opinion. I mean, the computer says equal, but I think it's much easier to play white here. So black played the move castles. And now after the move knight to c4, black played the move knight to d7. It's worth keeping in mind, of course, that white is not threatening yet to take that pawn on e5 because, well, let's say you do take. Well, after takes, what do you think would be black's response here? Now, as always, do make sure to leave a like for the video if you're enjoying it so far or if you've learned something new. And, well, that's also giving you the cue to see if you manage to find a winning move for black. The winning move for black is exploiting the fact that this pawn f2, the weakest link, can now say goodbye after queen to d4. Because bishop to e3 and queen takes e5 is obviously not what the doctor ordered. You know, d4 might appear to be getting the piece back at first, but after queen e4, dc5, and queen g2, well, basically you have the sort of attack that Tal would sack a piece for, except here black hasn't sacrificed anything. In fact, he's even up a pawn at the moment and still has the attack. And if you play a move like knight g4, trying to defend everything at once, well, black says, well, I've done my tactics, I know to remove the defender. And he plays bishop takes g4, queen g4, and I mean, even just queen f2 is pretty nasty in this position. Just taking the pawn with check and, you know, with f5 even. It's pretty clear that this is just a horrible position. Black's got all the pieces in the attack and, well, white looks like a beginner having only moved his queen at the start of the game. So I played a move queen e2 instead, and this is kind of the modern trend to the position, where in the old days I used to castle and then see who would fall asleep first, and occasionally white won the contest. But, okay, on a more serious note, queen e2 is the sharp way to play this. And the idea, as you might have guessed, is not to castle short, but after rook e8, defending the pawn and bishop d2. No, white is going to castle long instead. Go castles long, charge these pawns up the board and make the black king. And the thing is, the computers used to laugh at this sort of plan, but when White started winning game after game after game at the very top level, with big names like Carlsen going down, I think players like Caruana, Wesley So, Nepomniachtchi, pretty much all the players, like if you're on the top 10, you probably lost to this line at some point, basically, as such. So that tells you this is a really powerful system for White, and it's very dangerous to deal with this kind of pawn storm. And in the game, Navara didn't really manage. In fact, if you want to see how Carlsen struggled against our system, let me show you the following game. You're going to love this one. Carlsen played the move b5, which I do think is actually the best move in the position, because you do want to get those pawns rolling and try to get some counterplay for when White castles queenside, which I mean we are going to be in an attacking race very soon. Well, Carlsen played knight f8, and Hikaru said, you know, I'm not going to castle long and let you get your attack. I'm just going to attack with my king in the center. And the only reason why I can really get away with this is because the center is very closed. If Black had some pawn break to blow up in the center, then White would kind of regret this sort of very, brash kind of attack. But here it's actually kind of okay. But Carlsen didn't play the move a5 and sort of go for the pawn storm anyway, which is probably what I would have done. But instead he made a little finger feeler. He played the move knight to e6, and then Nakamura struck with the move knight takes e5. We could call it like Hikaru's magic that he gets the top players to blunder like this. And then sort of people like me say, why can't we get Carlsen to blunder in this way? But anyway, on a more serious note, the point is that if Black does play the move knight d4, I think that this is what Carlsen was going for, saying that the queen is under attack and knight is under attack as well. But actually the tactics work in White's favour. Not because of the move queen h5, because then g6, and unfortunately you can't really keep your knight defended anymore. Queen g5 and f6 is a little bit embarrassing for White, to say the least. But instead we look at all the checks and captures. Remember that calculation technique, because it will get you out of many sticky situations and give you many wins. So capture for White, knight takes f7, ends up being very strong. It's not a desperado move, because after king f7, well, it's kind of a desperado actually. After king f7 we have queen h5, and with the fork on the king and also on the bishop, we collect on c5 and just be 2 full pawns up. But if instead Black plays a move like knight to e2, well, we play knight takes d8, and, they can try to trap our knight with knight d4, but it turns out we're in time to go b4, bishop b6, and then after c3 we're able to basically hit their knight, make sure that if their knight moves, our knight gets out, we're going to get our jail free card, or if they do take, well, they get 1 pawn back, but they're still down a pawn in this position after rook c1. Now, I know this is a very long variation, so well done for you guys for keeping up with takes, rook takes d3, and now after rook c6, well, White is up a pawn, he's hitting the c7 pawn, and I can even just castle. Now, when your king's in a center, sometimes it's easy to forget, I can actually still castle in this position, but it turns out you can. So instead, Carlsen played the move a5, saying, okay, I'm just going to kind of rage quit here. But after the move queen h5, it's just all over. And after g6, queen f3, f6 and knight takes c6, like White was just up all this material. And actually after queen d7, there's a fun finish here, where Nakamura could have played knight g4 and gone for all the monster knight forks. But instead he went queen f6, and, well, this also ended up being completely winning, where after bishop c3, Black didn't really have a good defense against queen h8, and queen to h7, and after rook f8, queen h8, White just started collecting the pawns, takes, and, White has 5 pawns for the piece at the moment. Like, that's pretty incredible. Like, it's enough compensation for a rook even. And after king d7, d4, b4, and d takes c5, Black resigned here, because once that rook and the knight comes into the attack, it's just completely game over. So not too early at all for Carlsen to resign. So that's the good news, that my recommendation can allow you to even beat Carlsen in 22 moves. At least your name is Hikaru Nakamura. But let's also see this game, other game. Like, this one is actually really beautiful, so it's definitely worth keeping your eyes peeled for Wei Yi's coming sacrifices. Navara took by surprise, because at the time that Wei Yi played this game, this was an almost unknown idea. And I would dare say, actually, if you're playing this at below a 200 level, I think it's very unlikely that your opponents are going to be ready for this. So it's a really great system to play for the average club player or online player, as well as for the chess grandmaster. So after bishop d6, White played the move h4. Again, remembering the Nakamura concept that we're delaying long castling. So if they do throw their pawns, they're just throwing it at nowhere, as such. But after c5, well, White played h5. And Navara probably thought, I'm just going to play h6 and, well, after castles. And knight b8, my king is perfectly safe, because, well, I'm just going to play f6, and how are you going to break this fortress is probably what was going through Navara's head. I think that instead Black probably should put the knight on f8, Because often in these lines, I find that knight is very well placed on e6 in these positions. But I can often go to d4 or f4, which would be quite a nice active square. And it also kind of holds back the attack that we're going to see white execute in the game. Now, after knight to b8, white played the move rook d to g1. I think it's actually too preparatory. Like, in these sort of positions, the time is of the essence. So if you can save a tempo and get g4 in one go, I mean, why not? Yeah, black can take that pawn, but it's actually a poison pawn, one of the favourite techniques of grandmasters. We go rook d g1, piling that rook to that open file. If the bishop tries to retreat, well, we can take on h6 and use the peon on the g file to crash through. But if they play bishop takes instead, well, then we take and... I mean, when you've got all this space and when black has all of the queenside pieces still slumbering at home, it's pretty obvious there's going to be something very strong for white. You know, if bishop takes h6 or, you know, if king h8, you're leaving the f7 pawn hanging. If you play king f8, then you've got like queen g2 and, you know, you're just going to bring the knight around and that queen on f6 is not going to be long for this world to say the least. You know, you just crash through and say GG. So in the end, Wei Yi played rook d g1, which could have given black an opportunity to maybe go bishop g4 and try to cut his losses and or at least stop the raging pawn storm. But Navara thought, you know, you're just trying to bluff me, Wei Yi. I see through this. I'm going to go knight c6, g4, f6. And look at me, I stopped you playing g5, and if you don't get in g5, there's no way you're mating my king. Well, you'd be surprised at how true this statement by Navara turned out to be. Because actually, Wei Yi found an incredible move here. He played the move g5 anyway, and this is something that really separates the good players from the great players. The good players immediately recognize, oh, my opponent stopped my idea, and the great players say, well, how can I get my idea in any way and make it work as such? And that's kind of true for life as well. Like, we don't listen to the naysayers saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on YouTube, right? But okay, after g5, black played the move f takes g5, trying to keep the king side closed, but Wei Yi says, nah, goes knight takes g5, and... well, it all kind of just goes downhill for black from here. Because if you don't take that knight, white is just going to move the knight back and just have a monster attack down the g file without even sacking any material, which is the dream for us. So Navara decided to play knight d4 first. If he goes takes immediately, then we're just going to go bishop g5. Now, there isn't really a good defense for black. I mean, if you try to exchange off some pieces with bishop e7, well, white just goes captures, and, you know, if queen e7, we play h6, and... well, the rook is just going to come to g7, and when you've got three major pieces in attack against a naked king, well, it's pretty obvious who is going to win. You know, you can almost put bets on it at this point for white. Because after g5 and queen h5, you know, we're just threatening that pawn. And his pawn is definitely moving, trying to not get taken, but after knight e3, bring that final piece into the attack. You know, that's something that, again, it separates the good players from the great. The good players know how to attack, but the great players make sure that all the pieces are in the attack and then go and finish with the full army. After king h8, you can even just play knight takes g4. And even though it's only 2 pawns for the piece, the reality is that in this position, white is preparing just to sort of jump in with the pieces like queen h5, rook g7, and, you know, these guys are just spectators watching the show for black. So it does turn out to be a winning position for white, even though black is currently a piece up, because black just can't use that piece, and his king is just way too exposed here. So Navara went knight d4, and then after queen d4, he then decided to take on knight g5, saying, well, okay, at least I got my knight to a more active square. And he tried to move bishop e7 because, well, if you do move the queen, still h6 is coming anyway. And you can't really keep the position closed as black, because after g6, you have the move of h7, and you're just going to bring your bishop into f6, and that's going to make sure that your pawn is going to become a queen. Well, instead we had to move bishop e7. And now actually Wei Yi made a very interesting decision that I'm quite impressed by, in fact, where he realized that taking this rook, the bishop, is actually not as effective here as it was on one of the earlier turns. A big difference, and this is a great example of the comparison technique for the more advanced students watching this, is that after the move h6 and g5, well, now it's not so clear. Because after queen h5, black has this move of knight to e6 if he wants, or even actually the move g4. And having that knight able to kind of go after the rook or to harass the queen really does take a lot of the shine off of white's initiative here. Of course, true that white can play it a bit differently, but the move that Wei Yi played of bishop e3 is, I think, the best move. If you want to play the bishop to d2, that's also a very good move, so well done. Now, after bishop to f6, well, he's trying to defend, but Navara just doesn't have the pieces around the king, and the rooks are now getting forced open. Like, this is what you're generally aiming for when attacking the king. The reason why we play these pawn storms as white is so that we can force open the file so that our rooks and our queen can join in the attack, and that's exactly what we see with this game. which continued with rook to e7, h takes g7, rook takes g7. And okay, this is an easy puzzle for you guys of how white should play. There's actually a lot of good moves in this position, but why not bring the queen in the attack to sort of mop up now that the pawns have done the dirty work and cleared the obstacles for our pieces. You know, kind of like the bulldozers in that sense. Well, black played the move bishop to e6. He's trying to develop his pieces because if you play a move like queen e7, let's say, well, I can just play queen h8. And we can't see that the pins are just going to be too much after takes. And after rook h7, you know, you're going for bishop h6, going after the bishop this way. Or if they play knight to e6, you can take on e5. And I mean, even though black is currently up a piece, it's pretty clear that after, say, you know, the computer is wanting to show off here, but simple knight g4 and bishop h6, like, you can kind of see that black's days are numbered because white has 4 pieces in the attack and black has only 3 defenders. And, well, you know your math, 4 beats 3, especially when black for 3 are also, you know, not hobbled and are severely disadvantaged with the handicap of defending the black king. So after bishop to e6, we had the move bishop to h6. Actually, that queen h8 I mentioned before is actually still even better, but okay, this move is also going to win, because if you play rook g1, well, we take back, and, you know, king to h8, and bishop f8 would already be a nice little checkmate. So that's why black can't trade off the attackers, because then he's trading off his defenders as well. So I had bishop f7, and okay, now for the part where I want to set the puzzle to make sure you guys have been paying attention. So what is the winning move that Wei Yi played here in this position with white to play? Okay, well done if you came up with the move bishop takes g7. The idea of bishop g7 is, okay, if you don't take the queen, you're just lost. But, of course, bishop g7 runs into a queen h8 mate. You know, bonus points if you saw that. But after bishop takes h5, we go bishop takes f6. King f8. Of course, the rook king was under a discovered check, so black didn't have time to defend the queen. So king f8, bishop takes d8. And okay, rook takes d8 would still leave black in exchange down here. So he tries knight to e2. But after king b1, knight g1, and now bishop c7, Navara resigned here because Wei Yi is going to either take the knight or take the bishop on next turn and just be a piece and pawns ahead. So there you are. Now you see how to beat the Berlin. So I guess you're going to have a lot of fun going for these hack attacks in your games. If you need a refresher, it's where we play the Ruy Lopez, and then when they play their Berlin, we put the pawn on d3, building a very solid pawn chain. And then after the move of bishop c5, we take on c6, play knight d2, and basically go for the plan of castling long and charging the pawns at their king. You know, not too difficult to understand after seeing these 2 games where Carlsen and Navara both got completely demolished by their opponents. In fact, in less than 30 moves in both cases. So, as always, you know, to be keeping up to date with more of my Grandmaster Chess videos, do make sure to subscribe, and that will keep you posted as well on the next How to Beat Chess Openings videos. You know, leave your comments as well with your thoughts as well. Always love to hear what you guys have to say and what you're thinking. So, that being said, I'm going to see you guys for the next video on how to beat that chess opening.